Hi, this video is just to give you tips and tricks for the 2025 Designer Mystery Block of the Month by Fat Quarter Shop. I'm really happy with my purchase. They gave plenty of fabric and the directions were clear to follow. There's just a couple little helpful hints I'm going to share with you that I found made things easier. The first one is when you get the directions for how to cut the fabric, everything is straightforward except for one block. And that's this block here, I. It's actually one square, just like this. That will be this center block. For that center block, you use a 2.5-inch ruler to cut it, which I happen to have, or of course you could always use a bigger ruler and you just have to cut it 2.5 inches. But I definitely recommend you fussy cut this square, because if you were to take it to your fabric like you normally would and just put it straight on, you're going to end up with very little color because most of your color is going to be caught in the seam allowance. So instead of putting it straight on, you should cut your fabric if you want to have more color and design at a diagonal like I did right here. You can see I fussy cut it at a diagonal with these 4 bits of color in it, and they're all more than 1/4 inch away from my seam allowance so that will show up, which is pretty much what they did in their block, so that you don't end up with a block with one little dab of color in it. So that's the thing to know about that fabric cutting. The other thing to know about the fabric is this green fabric. If you look at it, it's a non-directional fabric. You can turn it any which way and there'll be birds that are right side up and sideways and upside down. So regardless of how you turn it, the direction doesn't matter. However, because for this quilt we're using such small pieces, the directions do end up mattering. Here I laid out for my block, this is the top, right, bottom, and left. But I made sure that in each one, like here on the left, to have at least some birds right side up. I have this bird right side up, this bird right side up, this bird, where'd he go? This bird's mostly right side up. And you can see that they all have some birds that aren't right side up, but at least there's some that are, so that you don't end up with a square where every single bird is upside down. The other thing that you need to keep in mind for this is that the white on white is very easy to see here in the light, where this is the front and this is the back. However, if you don't have much light and you just go to sew, you can see that this is the front, and yes, you can still see it, but when you look at the back, it looks almost the same. So just don't forget that as you're sewing along, to remember for your white fabric to keep the right sides together and not to get it confused so you end up with it backwards. The other thing about this quilt is it's made up predominantly of triangles. There are a few square blocks here and there, but the vast majority of it is triangles. What that means is because you're cutting on the bias for most of those triangles, they're going to end up very stretchy. So you want to do everything you can to minimize stretching those triangles so that they match up properly how they're supposed to. This means lifting your iron up and down in up and down motions as you press and not side to side. It means sewing kind of slowly as you're sewing so you're not jerking things sideways and out of side. And just being aware that it's stretchy, so you want to do the best you can to keep things straight. Also, as you're pressing, you want to press, if you're doing white and green, you want to press to the green side. If you're doing orange and green, you want to press to the green side. And if you're doing white to orange, which I don't have displayed here, but there are some that are white to orange, you want to press to the orange side. And if you press consistently that way all the time, you can see on the backs of these blocks that that everything nests together really good. It comes together smoothly. There's nothing showing through to the front. So that's definitely the best way to press. When you start sewing for this project, you're going to want a chain piece, which is where you do pieces at a time of the same thing, one after the other after another. So like a chain piece, these two, and these two, and these two, and these two, etc. Before you start the chain piece, I always run a little piece of fabric through. I kind of start it here and run it through because if there's going to be tangles or eaten up fabric, it's usually going to be where you start. So you run that through, which I'm not going to do, I'm just showing you, but you'd run that through, and then you would start your chain piecing. Another thing about sewing these triangles is there are two ways I could sew this seam. And I'm not matching them up because I'm not really sure. I'm just kind of explaining how I did it. But this is the seam that needs to be sewn. So I could sew it like this or like this. You definitely, when you're sewing them, you want to start with the fatter material side, because you can see here this is way more fabric than this side. You want to start sewing this way because it will put less pressure on your fabric. You'll have less chance of getting chewed up in the machine and getting it out of joint than if you start at this side. It'll just keep things straight and help them not stretch as much. The next thing is on the other part of the blocks where you are sewing the orange and white to the white, all of my sewed triangles ended up a little bit bigger than my unsewn triangles, which means that when you go to join them together, this isn't going to go perfectly with one hand, but you can see if you look at the ends, when this is semi-lined up, that there's a little bit of extra fabric at this end and a little bit of extra fabric at this end. So that makes it harder to have your block centered. So what you need to do is line up the edges, and I can't really line them up perfectly with one hand, but you'd want to line these edges up along this seam where you're going to sew and make them be even. But to make it be center, you want your point where it meets the orange and white to be right in the middle of the orange and white. So you can see mine's a smidge to the orange side. So you want to do it like this. And so that's where you want your three things to be. You want this to be in the center, and then these to be even with each other as you sew it this way. And then when you go to sew it, it'll end up even. Also, when you're doing your 4 patches, I can sort of show you here, but all of mine in the center meet up beautifully. And if you end up, like if you were going to sew this, most people would start right here and sew along it. And for this, it's actually fine because you only have 3 pieces. But if this piece were like this piece where it had 4 pieces, where it was 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top, one trick to how you can always get your centers to match up is that you just sort of start in the center right above the seam. And I'll do it from this side because this one's more right. You want your hump, your needle, here's your needle, you want it to go over the hump. So it's pressed this way, so you'd put it in this way. You'd put your needle down and you'd sew just over the hump to about right here. Then you take it off and you'd go back and start at the beginning. And the best way to do this so it doesn't get stuck is to start with needle down. Then when you're putting in at your 1/4 inch allowance, seam allowance, you just measure it up. Mine's not lined up properly, but I'm just showing you how you're not actually starting at the point. You have your point meet at the needle so that it just starts right there at the 1/4 inch and goes down. And if you were sewing 4 together, this would ensure that you get that neat little point right in the middle. But for this one where it's 2 on the one side and 1 on the other, that doesn't actually matter. But that's it for this video, and I hope you have a great time making your block of the month. I know I really have enjoyed it, and thank you very much.